Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Skipbound, and this is Bleacher Features, where myself and a guest discuss a sports film. And as always, it'd be pretty boring if I were sitting here talking about a sports film by myself. But it's my two loves, sports and movies, massed them together for this show. And once again, I got my guest from earlier this season, Rachel Silvestrini, back to discuss Cinderella Man. Rachel, welcome back. And what do your first impressions? About the movie Cinderella Man? Why did you want to talk about this movie?
It's just so inspiring. Like all of these, you know, well, the vast majority of sports movies are about the underdog or, about achieving dreams or coming back from, like, it's so inspiring. And I'm such a softie inside. Also, my dad taught me to box when I was young. So this kind of has a soft spot with like the dad working with his kids and teaching him what a jab is versus like, a right hook or something. Like it's just so good. Plus, it's the cinematography of it all and the color palette, like for the times, it just works so perfectly.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it's one of my favorite boxing movies. It's definitely in my top five. But there's so many things that this film has that you just say to yourself, why can't other sports films do this? Why can they go off in these weird directions? And then you say Ron Howard was like in the sweet spot of his career at this time, and then he gets like no love for Cinderella Man, and I don't understand. It just like doesn't make any sense. He's like in the middle of all these great films he was directing, Beautiful Mind, and all these different films, and then he does this, and it's like, oh my God, this is a phenomenal film. And then he just doesn't get any love for it, and I just didn't. It just baffled my mind that with Russell Crowe, who was right in the midst of his like Russell Crowe thing he had going on at that particular time. Renee Zellweger was at the top of her game at the time. And it's like somehow this film's slipped under the radar, and I don't understand
Yeah,
why.
I don't either. Like it does have such an all-star cast, and it is based on a true story, which normally gets a lot of people in there. It is, a sports movie, which tends to get a lot of people in there. And it's Ron Howard. Like you would think that with all of these elements coming together, that it would just be like this massive box office hit that everybody loves and talks about. But it's one of those like true anomalies that you're like, I don't understand why it just slipped right under the radar for so many and continues to do so.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But we're going to get into it now. This is a Universal picture with Imagine Entertainment. That's Ron Howard, Brian Grazer. That's their production company. The cast, obviously, Russell Crowe as James J. Braddock, the title character, the Cinderella Man. Renee Zellweger as May Braddock. Paul Giamatti as Joe Gould. Craig Bierko as Max Baer. Patty Considine as Mike Wilson, and Bruce McGill as Jimmy Johnson. Those are pretty much the main characters in the film. Ron Howard obviously directed it. Screenplay by Akiva Goldsmith and Cliff Hollingsworth, and score by Thomas Newman. You got anything to say about all this stuff?
Like it's just perfect. Like who doesn't want Paul Giamatti as their boxing coach? Like it's just everybody in this movie is cast so perfectly and carries out the role and just bears the weight of everything that's going on during this era with such ease
Yeah.
that you can't, like, there's no questioning what era we're in. There's no questioning like how hard it is for, May and Jim to keep their heads up during, the Great Depression, trying to like take care of their kids. Like it's just it almost looks effortless.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Here's a quote that I took. In all history of box, in all the history of the boxing game, you find no human interest story to compare with the life narrative of James J. Braddock. That's from Damon Runyon. Wow, what a quote! What a quote! I
It's
just
perfect.
love that. Yeah, it really is. It is really a perfect quote. So I want to say that. All right, let's get into this. So we find James Braddock, fighting Huffy Griffith, and he knocks him out in the second round at the Madison Square Garden. Joe ends up paying him off, but he doesn't. He's there. You want to come see the kids? Nah, I don't want to see the kids. Just see this guy Joe. He's an interesting character. We'll get into more about Joe as it goes along here. So then his wife says, "Tell me about the fight," and then she goes, and he says, Jim goes, "You should come and watch." She says, "When you get hit, it feels like I'm getting hit. I can't watch."
And I'm not as strong as you, which I think is complete bull. If you've given birth to 3 kids during this Depression era and you're keeping them together, you're keeping your family together, like that woman has a spine of steel.
Yeah,
just really strength. But I totally understand that. Like that she has the toughest role in all of this. It's like, yeah, he's the one that's doing the physical fight, but like if anything happens to him, she's the one left behind to pick up the pieces of the family. She does such an incredible role.
Yeah, you're right. She asked about the girls that are at the fight. Of course, the boxers, they're going to attract the girls at the fight. He tells her about a tall brunette at the fight. Then she goes, "Oh, you're a 2-time Golden Gloves champion, the Bulldog of Bergen, the pride of New Jersey." This is kind of the narrative that this is who he is, James J. Braddock. So then we go 4 years later, September 25th, 1933, 4 years later, into the Great Depression, 4 years into the Great Depression. And they're living in this little apartment downstairs of this building, and it shows that they're poor now. They're not where they were, where they had a nice house in New Jersey. Now they're living in this little
just the transition that they use, because like I think that he's like emptying his pockets or something and putting them on top of a dresser, and there's like jewels and jewelry, and he pulls out like his money clip that's got a ton of cash in it, and then it just, as it keeps panning, and then it keeps panning over to another dresser that is completely empty with like only their wedding picture and like a pocket knife or something, and like that's it.
And his tooth.
Yeah, and his bridge.
Yeah, and then she ends up pulling his socks out of the oven. That's how she keeps he's like, "Where's my socks?" She's got them in the oven heating up, keeping it that way. And out in the cold weather, he keeps his socks warm, which I thought that was if you lived in the cold weather like I have, I tell you, that's a good trick right there.
Oh yeah, well, not the oven. Don't do that, guys, because depending on the type of oven you have, your socks could catch fire. But she he was asleep the night before, and she took him off. She took his socks off his feet to wash them, and then they were drying in the oven. But like, it just goes to show you just how far they've fallen, like, and just how hard it's hitting them.
Yeah, the daughter is hungry. May says the gas and the electric notice. Jim walks outside to get the milk. There's a notice past due on the milk. So she takes what milk she has and puts water in it, and she turns the water and makes a full thing of milk using water. Trust me, I've had government milk growing up as a kid, and it is not good. But that's what government milk is. It's powder and water, and you create milk that way. So I can tell you, watching, it's not enjoyable to be drinking government milk. And that's basically what she did. She took a little bit of milk and put a bunch of water in it. That's what you do with government milk. So it was not good. But when you're poor, you do what you got to do. They didn't have any milk. So the daughter, I want some more. She's hungry. And then so then Jim gives his bologna to his daughter, tells her a story about eating a big steak and mashed potatoes the night before. God, he makes a story up about eating.
Yeah, if anything tells you who Jim Braddock is, it's this moment right here when he is talking to his daughter and telling, like, making up this story so that, you know, she doesn't know just how horrible it is right at the time with the family, and gives her, you know, the piece of fried bologna that was supposed to be his, as he heads out to the docks to potentially go work, what, like 16 hours and get paid shit wage, and, you know, out in the cold. And, you know, he's a dad. He makes the sacrifices. He loves his family. And that's the core of who Jim is. And it's so, this movie gets me emotional.
Yeah, he's a great father. He's just a great father. The song while he's walking, the music in the film is really good. The score by Thomas Newman. I noticed throughout the film the different places where there's music, and then there's the score, and they fit it in really well throughout the film. So Jim goes to the docks, tries to get work. Then you see a newspaper on the ground. It says 150,000 people unemployed, which those are the little touches that you see. Like you see the newspaper on the ground, 150,000 unemployed. That was a nice touch by them to add that in there. So then that puts it in your mind, the time and the period and what's going on at that particular time in history. So he comes back from not being able to find work, and the son had stolen a salami from the butcher, and he takes him back to the butcher, and basically makes the kid apologize for stealing. No matter how bad we are, we don't steal, he tells him. And that's another father. That's where Jim is just such a great father. No matter how bad things are, we don't steal. And
then he follows it up with another golden thing about, he finds out why his son stole it. It's because one of his friends' parents couldn't afford to feed their kids anymore, and they got shipped out somewhere to be taken care of by family that lived somewhere else. And the kid was so terrified that was going to happen to him that he stole for the family. And that's when Jim made him the promise that I will never ship you out. Like I will never get rid of you like that. Yeah. And it's just, you could see the tears welling up in his eyes, and the kid starts crying, and it's just, what a dad.
Yeah, that's the kind of father we all wish we could have. So he ends up getting a fight for $75. Well, potential $75. So Joe could tell his opponent, he could tell the guy he's fighting is a bum, so that means he thinks Jim should win. Then he starts kind of massaging his hand, and he realizes Jim has a hurt hand. And Jim's like, I have to keep fighting. I owe everybody money. Mm-hmm. And he says, okay, I'll double tape it. I'll double tape your hand so you can go out there and fight. So Joe, I love some of these speeches that Joe gives these motivational, who beat this guy and who beat that guy. And, it kind of pumps him up a little bit by saying all the different guys he beat and this and that and the other. So I always like those little speeches that Joe gives. So then it turns out it's just like this awful, boring fight. And wouldn't you know it, Jim breaks his hand on the guy's head.
Oh, when he dropped, first of all, it's one of my favorite things about this movie is when he punches, there's like 2 or 3 instances where they do this, where something happens during a fight, and they use the flashbulb from the cameras as a type of x-ray to show you what's going on in their bodies. And you can see as soon as he drops his head and he punches it, you can see the bone, you can see the bones in his hand and wrist shatter, and his hand just completely crumbles. And it, for anybody who's ever boxed before, you know how badly it hurts when you don't set your wrist and it rolls. Oh, that pain is with you for so long. And he actually fractured bones. So that shot alone is just, it's one of my favorite things about this movie.
Yeah, those little things that he gives us information by doing that, the direction, and that's direction by Ron Howard. That's some great direction by Ron Howard.
This movie is long, but what that does is it cuts out the unneeded scene where they take him to and show him the x-rays and explain everything. You already see They took that 3 minutes and condensed it to like 1.5 seconds.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Jim uses his left hand instead, but this makes for a pretty boring fight. Jim can't throw punches with his right. Joe gets mad at the crowd because the crowd's all like throwing things at the ring, and they're all upset. And Joe's like, "Dry up, crowd, dry up." The crowd was pretty unruly. But I mean, they're gonna pay to see fights. They're not have two guys just grab each other and do nothing in the middle of the ring. They don't want to see that. And as a sports fan, I wouldn't like it either.
Yeah, this also isn't a fight in Madison Square Garden. Like, this isn't like a high school gym, the fans aren't necessarily like the highest caliber that you can pull in. So they are a little rough and they are a little brash.
Maybe drunk.
Probably drunk.
Yeah. So Jimmy Johnson is mad at Joe, says he's revoking Jim's license. So at injury to insult to injury, he breaks his hand, then he loses his license to fight. And this is just like icing on top of the cake here. It's like, oh my God, you're watching this and you're like, oh my God, this is ridiculous.
The speech that he gives, the way that Jim talks to Jimmy, who after he finds out he got his license revoked, he goes to talk to him after the match, and he goes like, Jimmy looks at Joe, he's like, "Didn't you tell him?" He's like, "Of course I told him. He wants to hear it from you." And he just very plainly, like, he's not begging, he's not, yelling or threatening. He's just he very plainly states, like, "I've won in the past. I can win again. I've never given up. I've done so much work for you. Just give me another chance."
Yeah, and that's basically what was next on here. I was going to say, Jim begs Mr. Johnson for a second chance. He says, "Go home, Jim." Jim says, "Go home with what? A broken hand from Mount Vernon?" And that really just brings the whole thing back. It brings it all home right there. Go home with a broken hand from Mount Vernon. And you're like, oh my God. And then, of course, he's going to go tell his wife that he gives her a hug, and then he breaks the bad news to her, that he didn't get paid. And then of course, she's thinking about the kids and everything else. And she's, "Oh, if you can't work, we can't pay the bills," because she thinks, well, he's got a broken hand, he can't work. Yeah. And then Jim says he can work. She says he can't because his hand is broken. So they have that kind of thing. Then he covers his cast with black shoe polish. So he's trying to disguise his hand so he can go back to the docks and get some work that way. So he ends up getting picked. He ends up getting picked for work. Meets a friend. He meets a new friend named Mike Wilson at the docks. That's Patty Considine. Foreman says, they talk about it. Foreman says, "What's wrong with your goddamn hand?" And that's line for line for what they say in the movie. So that's why I said that. So I normally wouldn't say that, but that's what they say in the movie, so I have to say that. So Mike stands up for him and says, "Oh, he can work. We've been working all morning, da-da-da." So Mike stands up for him. He barely knows the guy, but they have been working together. So he keeps the job, and then after job, he buys him a beer. And Mike talks about wanting to start a union. This is at the time in our country where there's a lot of work practices that are kind of pretty bad, abusive.
Not kind of. Work conditions are terrible. Like, this is also around the time that Newsies happened. So, like, child labor, unsafe work environments and hours and low pay, like everything that could go wrong or that could be bad with the employment industry, like, happened during this time.
Yeah.
So talking about unions during this time was, you're lucky to live if somebody overhears you, because it was one of the big things that corporations or company owners didn't want you to unionize, because that's money out of their pocket. And especially during the Great Depression, like, no one's got money to throw around.
No, you're absolutely right. So now we're at December 1933. Man comes to the house, turns off the electric. Meg begs him to stop. Guy says he has kids too. Basically, it's $44 to turn on the electric, and then also on top of that, his son is sick. Howard is sick. Mason is a prayer. Say that again.
He just starts, like, you just hear, it's like the saddest sound, like they're like the Meg and Jim are talking in the middle of the night, and then all of a sudden, like, they're just having this heartbreaking conversation, trying to figure out how they're going to pay to turn the heat and the electricity back on, and all of a sudden you just hear this like wet, heartbreaking cough coming from the kids, and you're like, oh my God, not one more thing, like, this can't happen. Yeah. These are good people. They're raising good kids. Like they're just being beat down left and right. And so they realize that like something has to happen, because if anything progresses, like, that kid's gonna die.
Yeah. So May says a prayer. Jim's like, I'm all prayed out. You know, that's kind of an issue that pops up a little bit later on with, there's some things that they bring up early in the film that come back in the film later on. So it's good. These little things like this. So you see May and the kids outside, they're breaking apart a lattice fence for firewood. That's how desperate they are. They see a lattice fence, they're breaking off the pieces so they could take home and put in the fire so they could actually have heat. Because that's what they're using now. They're using the stove to heat the house because they don't have electric. They're using candles and so forth to heat the house. That's all they have. And then walking by, while they're doing that, you see this lady running by after her husband. Lady tells her husband, who's walking out on the family. You know, she's like yelling at her, where are you going? Where are you going? So it's obviously they're not the only ones having tough time. Everybody's having a tough time. And just little things, like little nuances like that, where the lady's running out to the husband, where are you going? You know, because he's leaving out on the family. It's like, that guy gave up. He gave up. Where Jim, obviously we know Jim hasn't given up, but that guy did give up, you know. So Howard's really sick. We just talked about that. And then finally, May finally breaks down after. I mean, it's just one bad thing happening after, and then she finally goes out into the middle of the cold, and she just starts crying, and she's breaking down in the middle of the night. She's had so much things go wrong, and it's just like, now the son's sick, just one more thing that just like is starting to break her down. And she's, like you said, she's so strong. I mean, May is such a strong woman, you know, and but she finally breaks down after all that. And then this is the thing that we know as the viewer watching the movie. We're like, no, don't do this. But she does it anyway.
May, you can't blame her for doing what's best for her kids. You know, like, one of them is sick, and you know, they say they even talk about how like they owe the doctor already, and so they can't take the kid to the doctor, which is like just the most horrifying thing I could imagine for a parent to say. And Jim comes home, and she's sent the kids to relatives to go live with them, and you know, not knowing that Jim made this promise to their son. And it's just this conversation. It's like, it's so heartbreaking. You want her to bring the kids, you want them to go get the kids back, but you know that they can't because of their safety and their health and everything. And it's just like the wind just gets taken out of your lungs during this whole scene. It just, there's no right answer.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And she says to Jim, you weren't here, you know. We know where he was. He's trying to find work. He's trying to get work. So Jim finally breaks down and goes to get assistance from the Emergency Release Assistance Department, which, you know, this is the last thing this guy wanted to do. I mean, and then the lady at the thing in the window, lady says, I never thought I would see you here, Jimmy. And trust me, Jimmy never wanted to be there. That's the last place he wanted to, but he didn't have a choice. Ends up getting $19 from them. Then he's walking downtown. He sees a nice family come out of a hotel and get into a nice car, and they look like they got all kinds of money. So there is a contrast of people. There are some rich people, and then there's quite a few poor people. So that would be a contrast.
At this point in time, there's no middle class. You're either dirt poor or a Rockefeller. Like, you're either making money off the backs of the extreme poor or you are the extreme poor.
Yeah.
But then he looks across the street and sees that he's across the street from, Madison Square Gardens, and goes over and talks to his old buddies. Now this shows you how strong of a human being he is, because he goes in and all of his old boxing buddies and the bookers and the managers are all sitting around playing poker, having a drink, relaxing in this really nice lounge. And he just stands there literally hat in hand, asking for help so that they can turn the electricity on so they can bring his kids home. Like, ugh. It's so heart-wrenching, and you just, like, the tears that are constantly brimming in his eyes but never spill over. Like, I don't know how he got through this scene. I would have been an emotional mess.
that was really the tip of the iceberg for him. Of that's the last thing you'd ever think Jim Braddock would do, is to go in there and beg these guys that he had a lot of respect for, including Joe Gould, which in a way he kind of embarrassed by doing this. I mean, Joe is hiding in the corner almost, like, oh my God. But then he eventually helps him. Joe Gould helps him out.
I don't think Joe Gould's embarrassed. I think he's just sad.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think he's just like, he believes in him so, like, Joe believes in Jimmy so much, and just wants to do everything he can. Like, he's the best manager that you could ever ask for. He goes out of his way and, like, tries to think up schemes to get him back in. And, like, the last, when he got kicked out, there was really nothing he could do. And I think that he just feels guilty that that Jimmy's in this situation to begin with, because if he had kept fighting, he may not have to do this. I mean, he may not have to walk around the lounge with his hat collecting spare change from, the people who took away his livelihood.
Yeah. And so Jim says he's sorry, and Joe says, what in the hell do you have to be sorry for? Joe says, how short are you? And Jim tells him $1.50. And then we fast forward to a birthday party, and then his father tells the story of sparring with the father. So the father is there, and Jim had the priest, which we talked about, where May was praying earlier. Well, this is the father of the church that they go to, and he was telling a story about sparring with Jim, which is kind of a funny story. It was a funny story.
It's so. I mean, who doesn't want their faith leader to be like a boxer? Like, I kind of want that in a guy, that's giving me religious advice. I want him to be able to, like, fight back, I guess, verbally and physically if need be. Like, it's such an old school, like, Irish thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. The priest is the boxer too. Mike is drunk at the party. He's arguing with his wife. Then he's arguing with Jim. Mike's wife is mad at Jim, says he wasn't going to hit her. Well, I mean, if we're watching the movie, it looks like Mike is going to hit his wife. So Jim steps in to help. All he does is push him, and the guy falls down, hits the car, and runs off. And his wife is mad at Jim. Jim steps in to help the lady out, but of course, Jim's a jerk because he steps in to help out.
Different times, different era. They had that rule of thumb thing. It's just it's so sad. But he is like a modern day Renaissance man. Like, he's stand up for women and not going to put up with that. He's not going to look the other way. Like, it's his friend. He doesn't want him to get in trouble. He also doesn't want him to be an ass. So, tried to put him in his place, and his equilibrium was just a little too drunk, and sent him off, and he just stumbles down the street.
Yep. You're absolutely. So he's over here teaching his daughter how to box. And then Joe comes over, breaks the news of a fight for Jim for $250. This is 1933, folks. $250 is a lot of money, especially since they owe money to people. Joe talks about the angle that Corin Griffin is going to knock out a guy who never been knocked out. And then Jim talks to Joe, and he says, I sold my gear. He didn't even have his boxing gear anymore. So he ends up giving him all this makeshift boxing stuff, red boots and all this kind of stuff.
Dude,
It's kind of funny.
The red boots were hot. Those were great boots.
Yeah. And he hears his stomach. Joe hears his stomach, and he's how are you supposed to fight this guy on an empty stomach? He goes and he gets him a bowl of hash. Hash is basically beef with some corn in it. That's talking about the time here, folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's also delicious.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me like. There's something to be said about a good diner with, hot stove top hash. It's so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he's got his hands taped up, and he's trying to make sure that his hand is like healed, and and he's I think the line he goes like, I'm not gonna retape you, I'm gonna go find you a spoon, and like it's just getting too close to time, and he just barrels down and just drops his mug into that plate and just starts eating hands free, and it's like, well, yeah, that's completely like, why wouldn't you just do that to begin with?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So this newspaper guy named Sporty Lewis comes in and talks to Jim, tells a story about Sporty not being a very good writer back in the day, writing a bad story about him. So he remembers who Sporty Lewis is. Sporty acts like Jim might not know who he is, but Jim, of course, knows who Sporty is. He's not a nice guy. Well, not a nice writer, I guess, but
he just wasn't too kind to him regarding that bout that he wrote about.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, sports writers are never, they're not the most biased or unbiased of creatures.
Jim says to him, he says, save the crap for the customers, basically saying, hey, get out of here. I don't. So we get the John Corn Griffin versus James J. Braddock, Madison Square Garden, June 1994. So we get Joe yelling out at the ring at Jimmy, and then he's saying, "Hey, use your left, use two lefts," and Jim's like in the guy's ear, "Welcome to New York," because this guy's from Georgia. He was on the military base, Fort Benning, Georgia. So he's he was in the military, I guess. So Joe, okay. And then Joe tells Jim, oh, it sure to hell beats working on the docks, doesn't it? So, and then this is kind of a thing he uses. He does this a lot now after this point in the movie. He goes, pop, pop, bang. That's just basically two lefts and a right. That's basically what he kind of gets him to do, because no one's expecting him to use his left. So that's how he comes up, pop, pop, bang. So Sporty said, hey, this went longer than I thought. He thought it was going to end in the second round, and Sporty goes,
2 rounds longer than I thought he'd last at the end of the second round.
Yeah. So he's already wondering what the heck's going on in this fight. So Joe says, where the hell? This is, if you've seen the trailers, you've seen any of the, this is in the trailers, this scene here. Joe, where the hell have you been, Jimmy Braddock? That's one of the great lines from Joe Gould. I mean, and that's Paul Giamatti. I mean, he got nominated for an Academy Award for this role, and he's great. I mean, he just is great. Oh, yeah. He just has so many great lines, and so many, just the way he presents this character. He really shows us the type of people that lived in that time, Paul Giamatti.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also just, I feel like that's just a boxing manager, like I feel like that's like it's very Mickey-esque from Rocky, like like you're there to give them shit, to call them on their bull, and like to make sure that their head's in the match. Like it's not their job to deal with all of the external. The only thing that they focus on is between those 4 posts, and that's it. And it's Joe's job to keep them focused there. And so I love the way that Joe interacts both with Jimmy as well as like the crowd as a whole, or, the other boxer. It's just,
Yeah.
I also, you can see the ease of Jimmy walking into this bout so far in the movie in comparison to the past ones, because the other ones it's been a do or die situation. It's a make it or break it. And here he literally in the locker room beforehand talks about how, you know, he's like, you're, what's wrong with you? Are you loose? Like I've never seen you this relaxed before a match before. And he just kind of goes, are you kidding? This is going to be my last match in a sold out arena in Madison Square Garden. Like, I've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
And like, he just kind of goes into it with that, you know, attitude. And you can see the way he boxes. Like I love watching boxing. I love analyzing the physiology of it, and like watching to see like who carries their hands too high, whose shoulders hunch too much, you know, whose elbow twitches before they throw a jab or a hook. Like I love analyzing all that. So they did such a great job with his training that you can just read him and the other boxers so beautifully, and the way they shoot it, nothing's too jammed in tight, nothing's too broad. Like, you get to see the action and feel like you're there without, you know, getting dizzy.
Yeah, they really. I tell you what, the fight choreographer on this movie is fantastic. They just do. All the fighters have different styles, and they're not like cookie cutter of each other. And Jim has his own style. He flips it from being a right-handed fighter to a left-handed fighter. So they definitely do a great job on the fight core. That's something I noticed in a lot of different boxing films. So I always want to see how they get the fight choreography. And some boxing films just don't get it right. And I won't mention them here, but I mean, some of them don't. But this one really did a great job with the fight choreography.
I mean, it's nothing that I don't think that, you know, how do I say this? I don't think that making each boxer have their own style of boxing, I don't think that if they miss that it's a deterrent for the movie. Like, I don't think it changes the movie. I think that it just adds something for the people who know what to look for.
Yeah.
Like, it's just an added element for those people who are boxing fans or boxers themselves to be able to look at and be like, oh, that's really cool. But everybody it just kind of flies over their head. So I really like that they put in that little bit of detail to this movie. Yeah. And he wins.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I was just right here. I was about to say it. You gave it away. You knew what was coming. Jim knocks out Corn Griffin in the third round. Jesus, and then of course Joe. Jesus Christ, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. You know, Joe and Josie, you know, all the expletives. You know,
did I mention Jesus?
Yeah, did I mention Jesus? Yeah, Joe says that was one hell of a good goodbye. You know, telling Jim that's one hell of a goodbye. So that's, we all know. And then while they're in the hallway, they just happen to watch Max Baer, and Max Baer is an absolute brute. I mean, a brute. I don't know. I think calling him a brute might be too light of a term, but
yeah,
he's an absolute brute when they're watching him from the hallway.
There's something so, I would say, animalistic.
Yeah.
But there's just something so calculated and so cold about the way that Bear boxes. Yeah. And it is deadly. Like, they're like, he's got his boxer on the ropes, and he literally just holds his head with his glove so he can hold him steady because he's stumbling, but he wants him to hold still so he can knock him out. Like, that is brutality and calculated and cold-blooded and terrifying.
Yeah, it really is. He's a terrifying guy to behold, just to watch what he's doing. You're absolutely right. So Jim comes home and breaks the good news to his kids, and they mob him. Of course, you know, he comes home a little bit like he doesn't like come in all happy. He just comes in, mopes in there, and then he sits down. And when he says he won, the kids come mobbing him. I thought that was a great scene where he kind of played with the kids a little bit, like, I won the fight, and they don't jump him. They jump all over him. So after the fight, and the payday, the Bills left him with $5 $5 to his name. $250. He ends up with $5 to his name. He owed $118 for various bills, back pay for various bills. He ends up with $5 in his pocket. That's, but that's
he's ahead. He's ahead.
Yeah, he had $5 ahead. Yeah, that's how you're gonna look at it. So, and then he sees Mike at the docks. Mike apologizes to Jim, says he wouldn't have hit his wife, which we knew that scene had to come eventually. It came pretty quickly after the birthday party. So they become friends again.
I do love the recognition that his foreman gives him. Like he pulls him forward and he goes, "Hey, is this you?" And like holds up the paper with like the headline of Braddock winning. And he's they start like doing the small talk of like, "Yeah, it was a good fight. Like, good job. Now go to work."
Yeah, because the thing is, he basically tells the guys, "Yeah, I can't afford not to work, even though I just was in that fight. I got to come back to work. I only got $5 in my pocket, so I got to keep working." So Joe Gould comes by again. Joe gives him $175, which makes it a fresh start and lets him train again instead of work. Basically talks to his wife and says, "Hey, let's take him in the ring," and basically telling her that if he keeps winning fights, they can get back on track and do things the right way and not have to worry about working and struggling and stuff. And that's basically what he's saying to his wife there.
Yeah, she doesn't want him to keep going because she's worried for him and for his health and all that stuff. And she's like, "I thought this was one last gig and like that was it. We're ahead right now." And he goes, "Yeah, but we're only like that's this month. What about next month? Yeah. Like you can't keep guaranteeing all those shifts down at the dock." So like he's like, "Well, let's do this. We've got a little money. We can be frugal about it now. I'll train and I'll win."
Yeah, and he says, "At least I know who's hitting me."
Yeah.
And he goes and he tells the kids. And then, of course, we know May's not happy. She goes to visit Joe. Joe opens the door. She comes in and she notices that Joe's got no furniture, 2 chairs and a table, and that's all he's got in his house. And, of course, Joe's wife is there. And basically, Joe tells May about his instinct that he had about Jim, that he had an instinct about Jim, and that he had to see it through to see what would happen for Jim. Basically, he trusted Jim, and he trusted his instinct on Jim, and he sold all his furniture in his house just because he knew that they needed some money to stake them on so Jim could train.
And then his wife sends him out of the room. Because she wants to talk to her. And that conversation between the two wives is so beautiful and telling about it. It's just their conversation about, they're guys when they have an idea and they have this drive in them, like you can't stop them, And she goes, "Can you stop yours?" And she's like, "No." It's also something that, while it seems a little reckless and dangerous, like it's really something important that they need to do, and it's something he's good at, and he has this new fire, and he's not the same guy.
No, he isn't, and he notices that with the left, part of it is the left that he's been using.
So Joe ends up going to talk to Jimmy to get another fight because he's like, "I don't have a fight for you yet, but I'm going to get you one."
Yeah. You
got a little manager like that.
Yeah. So that's basically what happens. Joe goes to beg Jimmy Johnson for a fight, talks him about the odds and the scenarios for the series of different fights, that if Jim fights this guy and he wins, and if this guy fights that guy and he wins, and so forth and whatnot. And then he says it's not pugilism, which is another line. If you watch the trailer, that's a big line from Joe Gould. He's got some great line. It's not pugilism. So basically he convinces Jimmy Jimmy Johnson to let Jim fight another fight. And it's a rematch between a fight that he had earlier with a guy named John Henry Lewis. So they fight once again in Madison Square Garden on November 15th, 1934. And then we have a training montage. All boxing movies have to have a training montage, don't they? It seems
I mean,
like
why else do you watch boxing movies? Honestly,
we,
but I do love the line that gets said by the guy. He's like, "You fought this guy. You took him down before." He goes, "He's not the same guy," and it's like people are starting to notice that he is not the same boxer that he was when he was fighting with a broken hand. You know, like this guy has a fire lit underneath him.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was about to say those words. You knew those lines. That's pretty good that you knew that. Obviously you're a fan of this film just like I am, so you're up to date on it. That was funny. It's not the same guy. It's like, oh boy, this isn't ever going good for John Henry Lewis. You know right then and there when it's not the same guy. So basically they're fighting. He's fighting John Henry Lewis, but then it kind of fades out into him fighting Art Lasky on March 22nd, 1935 at Madison Square Garden. So they kind of meld these two fights together, which is kind of cool because it saved time in the film. Like you said earlier, it is a long film. So Art Lasky is another guy that he ends up fighting right after John Henry Lewis. Then here's some corner talk from Joe. He will keep coming until you stop him. Beat this son of a bitch from the inside out. Joe has just got some great lines. You can't not love some of the dialogue from Paul Giamatti as Joe. Beat this son of a bitch from the inside out.
Got the best lines.
Yeah, he really does. I mean, he really does have some great lines. So
yeah, he beats the guy and then becomes the #1 contender in the U.S. Like he's had what four fights now, three or four. Yeah, so he wins his third fight and becomes the #1 contender to face Bear, who is none too pleased to hear that this nobody is going to be contending for his belt. Like,
yeah. So basically, he backtrack a second here. Lasky knocks Jim mouthpiece out. Jim has like kind of has things in his mind, and then eventually he basically gets back, picks his mouthpiece up, and basically proceeds to beat up Art Lasky after that. And then, but the fight ends up going to the scorecards. So, but he ends up winning, even though in a decision. Jim beats Lasky in a decision, like you said, become the #1 contender. And like you said, Max, his manager goes to Max's hotel room. He's got two ladies in there. They're doing things together in that hotel room. And Max says, bring me somebody who can fight back, basically saying that Jim can't fight back, which us as a viewer, you're like, have you been watching any of these fights? You don't know what you're talking about, Max. Would you say?
And then he calls him a bum, and you're like, oh, no, buddy, no.
Yeah, that's not good. So Jim returns the relief money he got a couple of years earlier. So this is a huge scene in the movie where Jim makes enough money to where he's taking care of his family. He goes back to the relief office, and gives them back the money he got, which as a viewer and us as a fan of this movie watch it, you're like, yes, this is such a great. How many people get money from various people that they need help with and actually pay them back once they're doing much better? Not a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
It just tells you the character of Jim Braddock that he does.
Especially since they're still like, it's not like a lot of things have improved. Like they're still waist deep in the Great Depression, and he's bringing back $314 or something like that back to the office to pay them back. That's massive.
Yeah, it really is. It's huge. So Mike's wife comes over, says he's missing. He's trying to get everybody organized. This is a call back to early in the film when he talks to Jim about the union, trying to get union. Says he wouldn't leave her and the baby. Basically, she knows he wouldn't leave her and the baby, so something's got to be wrong. So Jim goes looking for him. They call the place Hooverville. I guess it's a place where a lot of like down and out people are living, people are poverty stricken people live. A pretty nasty place called Hooverville. So when he's walking around, you see fires, you see people fighting, you see a bunch of police everywhere. And unfortunately, Jim finds Mike dead on the ground in Hooverville. We're not happy about that when we see that scene, but we kind of see that coming. We kind of see Mike's life lead into something like this, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, he's a massive mess. He has a heart of gold, though. Like, all he wants to do is make things better, but he doesn't know how. And the only way that he can think of is to he just reacts to things. And like, when Jim's in Hooverville and he's talking to the police, he's trying to find his friend Mike, and he's talking to the police, and they're like, yeah, we're just here to like, calm down some of the people that were getting together and everything. And like the horse got spooked and it, ran off and overturned its wagon, and it like fell on a bunch of people and killed them. Like, and sadly Mike was one of them. And it just breaks your heart, because that he really just wanted to make things better and was doing whatever he could to do that, and then died.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So now we're at the press conference for Bear versus Braddock. And Jim says he's grateful for the opportunity. He says he's grateful because he lives in a great country. Then he's got to get turtles for the kids, because he told the kids he was going to get a title. They thought he said turtles. So now if he wins, he's got to get turtles for the kids. What
in my brain, the first time I saw this, I was like, that is the sweetest nod to Rocky I've ever seen in my life.
yeah, that's a call back to Rocky, because Cuff and Link, the turtles of Rocky. So that's interesting. That's a little callback, and it shows you that maybe the filmmakers and the people that made this movie really have an appreciation for that movie as well. That kind of little things like that might be hints to the love of Rocky. So then he talks about coming back after the injuries, and now he knows what he's fighting for, and he's fighting. One of the things he says, I'm fighting for the milk. That line, I'm fighting for the milk, is what a powerful line that is at the press conference.
That's an uppercut to the bread box, guys. Like, that just, because they're trying to get these flashy answers from him, and all he's doing is answering truthfully from the heart with like, no, dude, things still suck, and I'm trying to make it so that my family doesn't suck along with it. And like, he talks about his kids and turtles and I'm fighting for milk. I'm not fighting for glory. I'm not fighting for the title. I'm fighting so that I can feed and take care of my family. Like, yeah,
it's just, how can you not relate to that as just an everyday average person? We're all, none of us are rich. I mean, very few of us are rich. And so that's what lines like that and scenes like that are very, very relatable. They make the Jim Braddock character so relatable to the everyday American. So Sporty Lewis, are you scared for Jim? This is to his wife. This is to May. Sporty says it to May. Sporty, are you scared for Jim because Max killed two men? And Jim says she's scared for Max Bear, not of. So she's
honestly, it made me angry, because even back in the day, those guys would have known that was something that had happened and should have prepped them, both of them, before the press conference to be like, hey, just so you're aware, this guy has killed people. Like, this is what you're facing against. Because that was such a blindsided, like, you can see like the terror and shock in her face of like, I'm sorry, he did what? And you're putting my husband in the ring with him? Like,
yeah.
Poor May.
So Jimmy calls Joe and Jim in and shows them the footage of Max killing the man on the spot. Says his brain was shaken loose from his skull, and then they said the guy had a similar fighting style to Jim. So they think that maybe Jim is in trouble because he's got a similar fighting style to the guy that Max killed. So this is, as a viewer, as we're watching, like, oh boy, this isn't good.
Yeah.
So
you know
basically,
go down.
Say that again.
I said, you know, something's going to go down because they are two brawlers, basically. Like, Jim's more of a pugilist and more of a boxer, but there's something brutal and wild about the way that Bear fights.
Yeah.
And I could see Jimmy fighting like that, like back in the day, not cold hearted, but like in that like kind of wild style.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jimmy tries to scare Jim away from the fight, basically, because Max doesn't want to fight him anyway. We know that. So Jim lectures him about life on the streets and men living in cardboard boxes, basically. So then Jimmy offers Jim and his family and Joe and their family to come to his place for the restaurant for dinner. And then May, of course, always thinking about others. She saves the leftovers, doesn't let the leftovers get taken away by the busboy or whatever. Then we see Max come in. And then this is how we get the name of the movie, the title of the movie. Max comes in. Oh, if it isn't the Cinderella Man. So Max basically gives Jim the name the Cinderella Man.
Well, it was in the newspaper article.
Yeah, he basically reads the paper and
commenting on it.
Yeah. So Jim goes over to thank Max for the champagne. Max gave the table champagne, and Jim goes over and thanks Max for the champagne. And then they talk about, obviously he's the Cinderella Man. So then Max goes, "People die in fairy tales all the time." Oh God, that line.
Which oddly enough is sadly brutally true. If you read the old school like grim fairy tales, those are not children's stories. Those are terrifying.
Yeah. So that was kind of a good line there from Max. And then basically he says the smart thing to do is take a fall. Basically he's telling Jim to take a fall, which, we don't want that to happen as a viewer and a fan of Jim and everything. And he's not that type of guy to take a fall anyway. So I think I'll go a few rounds with the dancing bear. He tells the press that are there with the cameras, I think I'll go a few rounds with the dancing bear, which that is a great line. You love that line. You kind of get a kick out of that. And then this is uncalled for. This is uncalled. "You're too pretty to be a widow," he tells his wife. It's like, come on, Max, really? And then, Joe, now instead of Jim getting mad, Joe goes after Max Bear about saying that line to Jim's wife, which, that's the type of guy Joe is. He's a little fiery firecracker,
He also knows that Jim can't do anything.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, there are rules even back then that you can't have any altercations between the two boxers before the match. Like, nothing external, like, at all. So, like, Jim has to keep his cool, but Joe doesn't. Yeah. Joe's like, no. And then, of course, May does the classiest thing ever and does something I wish I could do at some point in my life and throws a drink in Bear's face.
Yeah, that was great. To
which Bear comments, "What, your wife's doing your fighting now?" And, like, Jim just kind of takes a beat and just goes, yeah, ain't she something?
Yep.
Like, oh!
Yeah, you gotta love that.
Battle this guy.
Yeah, that is some great dialogue there between all of them. I mean, that's a great scene, really. It really is. And Jim, of course, stands up for his wife. Ain't she something? Yeah, that's so. May gets mad at the kids, and Jim says no boxing in the house. So basically, she's still thinking about Max killing those people, and she's. It's on her mind. It's weighing on her, and because Jim is teaching the kids a little bit of boxing and stuff. She's like, no boxing in the house.
No boxing outside the house. No boxing ever. You guys are going to college. Like, oof. And I mean, I guess it's just, one of those amazing things that like parents have for their kids of like, I want you to do better. I want you to be better than I am, which is fantastic. But like, if that's the one, like I remember my dad putting his hands up and like him teaching me to box like that. Like it's such a treasured memory, but she's so terrified of what's going to happen. Cause I mean, in the best of times when your spouse dies, it's hard. And especially back then, like, no way.
Yeah, you're
So
absolutely right. And then her, she's, you're not getting your heads bashed in. Basically, she thinks Jim's going to get his head bashed in, which we're all thinking the same. We're thinking, Max Baer, man, he literally could do that because we know he has killed 2 guys. She says she needs him to be safe, tells Jim to find a way out of that fight, tells him to break his hand again if he has to. And then basically another person telling Jim to give up on the fight, not to fight the fight. So everybody's basically doing that. They're trying to get him to give up the fight. So we find out that his ribs aren't right since the Lasky fight.
Which was another one of those X-ray shots, which was great when he gets like that right hook to the left ribs, and you just see them like kind of crunch in. Oh,
yeah. So, and then of course Joe goes, the press doesn't need to know about no goddamn ribs. Another great line. Jim says goodbye to wife and the kids before the fight. May goes to church to pray for Jim. Church packed with parishioners. They think Jim is fighting for them. The priest goes, they think Jim is fighting for them.
That whole exchange between when she just walks in and she sidles up to the priest and she's like, I'm just here to pray for Jim. And he goes, so are they. I'm just like, oh, waterworks. Just so many tears. It's such a great scene. But the way that he goes to say goodbye to his kids and like his wife, like it makes you wonder, do the kids know about Baer and his history with killing his opponents? Because like they're all just really sweet about it, and they stand there and like one of his hands just stands there and does the whole like JFK thing and like shakes his dad's hand and just stands there very solemnly and like even May doesn't let her emotions affect it. She's got to stay strong for the kids, and knowing that her husband could not come back after this, like, there's no privacy in that apartment for them to like say or do anything on their last night possibly together. Like that's heartbreaking. Yeah. You're right. So Joe once again gives him the old motivation speech, which he always does before the fights. Wife comes to watch the fight we thought she came to watch the fight then she leaves again. I guess she just kind of came up to wish Jim some luck when she came there. Says he can't win without her behind him. So basically she came there to tell him that she's behind him, even though she didn't want him to fight before. She's basically now saying, hey, I'm behind you. You can't win without me behind you. So that's a good line. That's for us. We're saying, okay, good. He needs somebody behind him. And that was kind of a good thing for Jim, for his May to come in there and say, hey, I'm behind you. So Jim's walking out to the fight and the whole crowd, there's no sound. So quiet. It's almost eerie. It's like I if it had been another movie, I would have expected the lead actor to make some kind of joke of like, it's like a funeral in here, something wisecracky like that. But the gravitas of the situation is so heavy and so real that nobody speaks until one person just kind of goes, you got this, Jimmy. And then the whole crowd just erupts and like it changes the entire energy of the whole place. Yeah, it really does. You're absolutely right. So the kids are listening to the fight on the radio in the stairwell, which we know they weren't supposed to be doing, but the kids want to see their dad. They want to hear their dad. They want to hear the story of what their dad has accomplished in his life. I just love the looks on their faces because they're sitting like on the staircase down to, I think it's the basement, and the door opens up and like their little eyes just kind of go up to the light like, oh, crap, we got caught. And like all of the
Yeah.
adults are up there and they're just like huddled around. Like the kids just have this little radio in their lap and they're like,
Yeah.
but
That was
I'm not going to turn it off. You're not going to make me turn this off, right? And they just like kind of make it go louder. I'm like, it's perfect.
Yeah, that was great. That was really great. So we're at the Bear Jim Braddock fight, Madison Square Garden, June 13th, 1935. So then the referee, this is a good dialogue here by the referee. No grabbing, no backhanding, no low blows, no funny business. Well, isn't that interesting? Once we get into the fight. When we get into the fight, we'll see. If we get none of that stuff. So Max Bear, Killer, or the Clown will show up. Basically, they're saying he's either a killer or early in the rounds he kind of clowns around, goofs around. So he's either a killer or a clown in the first round usually. So you never know what you're going to get. And then he's basically the clown from what we're gathering. He tells Jim to take it easy.
He's like, let it go
a few rounds. Yeah, let it go a few rounds, he says. So kidney shots from Max to Jim. So there's Max is starting to exert himself here, gives Jim a couple kidney shots. Joe, if he goes for the body, drop the elbows, break his hands, basically. So Joe's giving him some good advice here. This is advice that I think any boxer would want from their corner man.
Yeah.
If he does stuff like that, use the elbows, break his hands,
Yeah.
Teach him a lesson.
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier about like it's the fighter's job to be in the fight. It is the cornerman's and your coach's job to watch and analyze it for you. You should be doing you should just be pure reaction at the point when you're in there. Just be observant and all of that. But if there's so many things that are going on that like a boxer themselves cannot witness all at the same time, like during that bout. So it gets to the point where you do rely very heavily on your corner man to like be like, he hitches his right shoulder before he throws a hook, or he looks down every time he goes for a body shot. Like you have to have that pointed out to you because there's so much, there's just too much to focus on as for one person. And like the advice he gives, and it's just spot on. It just shows you why Joe is such a great man to have in his corner, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head there. So Max backhands Jim, asks how his wife is, says her name she says his name in her sleep, and then Jim gets upset, starts going after Max. Now Max is mad about so now they're really starting to go at each other here after the insults about May and so forth. So Joe Joe pepping up Jim, but he's still hurting bad. So Joe's in the corner trying to pep up Jim, but Max's shots are starting to wear on Jim.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, like, I love while they were exchanging, when Bear was getting Jim all riled up about like, oh, is your wife losing sleep over me? Like she's saying my name in the middle of the night. Like Jim's just trying to fight him back and he's fighting out of anger, which is something you're not supposed to do. And so all of a sudden you just hear Joe from the corner, like taunt him, and it distracts him because like the bear has an ego on him that is so big that he constantly has to have the last word. So he turns his head to speak to Joe, and Jimmy just fucking lays him out with a left hook, and it's so beautiful to watch. Yeah, he's just like, yeah, dude, keep your mouth shut. Like, keep your head in the match. Like, that's where it's supposed to be. You're not fighting him. You're fighting the guy in front of you with his gloves up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That was a great exchange by Joe there. And then Jim.
Great strategy.
Yeah. So now we're in the 11th round, and it's a slugfest in the 11th round. And Joe says, bury him. Sporty Lewis, do you guys see what I'm seeing? So Sporty Lewis is coming around at this point.
Well, there was a turn because they were both just kind of beating each other and just kind of like they started getting the wobbles, and then out of nowhere, Jim just comes back and he's refocused. He's stealthily and laser focused, and like he's just a brand new boxer, and it just gets to the point where, you know, everybody notices, and it's like, did you just see that happen? Like, this is like he found a new level as a boxer.
Yeah. And once again, dirty Max. We get a low blow from Max. Now we're finally in the 12th round, the 12th and final round of this fight. And then Joe's giving him more advice. Stay away from his right. Max behind. Go ahead.
They go 15.
No, I think back then they went to 12, but I'm not sure. I could be. I think they said the 12th round was the final round, but you know,
whatever it was, they went way longer than anyone else thought they could. It comes down to the very last round.
Yeah. So Joe says stay away from his right. Max corner. Max is behind on points. Joe's yelling, stay away from him. Keeps coming and swinging, and Max swinging and hitting Max. So Joe keeps saying stay away from him, and yet Jim keeps swinging and hitting Max. So Jim doesn't care. He doesn't, at this point, he just wants to kill Max Baer. I mean, he doesn't care what Joe's saying at this point in the match, because he sees the light at the end of the tunnel. Jim does.
He knows he can win.
Yeah, basically. So then Max is going for the knockout. Max hits big right on Jim. Hits a big right on Jim. Max misses Jim, gets him with lefts and rights. So Max is swinging. His wild swinging that he has allows Jim to start getting some good shots and lefts and rights. And
because he's not boxing. Max isn't boxing at this point. He's literally like, because boxing is here. It's between the shoulders. It's up and down, and it's there. And he is swinging wild, and he's just ducking and ducking and ducking, and then coming up and peppering him to the body, and like a few hooks to the face and uppercut to the jaw. Like he's flailing at this point, and Max is flailing at this point, and Jimmy just has his head about him because he is that seasoned of a boxer. And every now and then Jimmy will throw like a haymaker, but like it's a safe one.
Yeah, you're right. Max is at this point now, Max is actually holding on to Jim, and then he gets away and he starts swinging wildly. And now the fight is over, and they're taking too long for the decision. And finally, Jim wins on the scorecards from the judges. He's the new unanimous champion, heavyweight champion of the world. This whole fight is just just the fight choreography in this movie was great from the beginning, but this fight, there's so much going on. It's some of the best fight choreography I've ever seen in any fight in any boxing movie. Just the things that Max does, the things that Joe's doing, the things that Jim's doing, just all the blood, I'm amazed at how authentic this fight was. It could have been an actual boxing fight. It looked so real to me.
Yeah, there are times when during this match you forget that it's a movie, and you just think that, you know, like, wow, ESPN's got some really great camera guys.
Yeah.
and then you just question, like, wait, that's not like, these aren't real punches. Like, they're landing, like the way that they're being thrown and the way that they're reacting, like it just looks like they have this bout going on. And it's so brutal, and it's so exhausting and so stunningly put together that, like, you just can't help but love it. Like, I feel about this movie, like I cry at the end of this the same way I cry at the end of Warrior. You know, like, you're just that emotionally invested. It's, you know, it's such a great story. The fact that this is true and this has actually happened, it's just nuts. Like they do it such justice.
Yeah. Some just notes I had at the end of the movie. Jim fought Joe Louis 2 years later. Joe won the fight after being knocked down in the first round. Joe said about Jim, he was the most courageous fighter he had ever fought. Jim also served in World War II honorably. He later owned and operated heavy equipment on the same docks where he worked during the Great Depression. In the early 1960s, he helped build the Verrazano Bridge, and then Jim and May bought a house in New Jersey with the winnings from the bear fight. They raised their children in that house and lived there the rest of their lives. So what I always ask at the end is, obviously we broke down this film, but what is it about this particular film? Obviously you're a boxer. You love boxing just like I do, and you love why do you think this film resonates and stands up, and it has something that people can relate to and people can love, and it'll still be around as the years go by for people to say, yeah, this is a great boxing film, great sports film, great movie all around?
There's never going to be a time when an underdog story is not relatable. There are times during everyone's life where they feel like they've been beaten down, whether by circumstances or, even physically. Like there's just so much that happens in people's lives that every now and then you just feel like there's no way to go on. And literally in the span of a year, Jim goes from, being like having to go to the breadline and asking for assistance to being the #1 heavyweight champion of the world. Like it's a true story, and it's massively inspirational. And also for me, this movie, it just reminds me of my dad, and he was a really good dad. And, I have a lot of memories, relatable to this movie, like where he's teaching his kids how to box. And, like my dad had 3 girls, cause karma, I guess. But he taught each of us how to, he was like, well, you're going to go out into the world. I want to make sure you know how to throw a punch properly and not break your wrist. So like from very young, we learned how to box and we learned how to defend ourselves. And my dad was really proud about that. And there's just something beautiful about seeing somebody triumph and like do what they need to do and stick by who they like, their morals and who they are, and not sacrifice those in order to get ahead in life. And it's just I just think it's a really wonderful and sweet story.
Yeah.
About friendship and family and duty.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I have different stories about my father, but the stuff that really resonated with me is, him giving his food up to his daughter and telling the story about the steak and the potatoes, and then going to the relief office and getting money and going into the gentleman's club and putting his tail between his legs and asking for help. That kinds of stuff really resonated with me because I grew up really poor, and my mother and father had to do that for me. Basically my mother, because my father wasn't always there for me and for my brothers and sister. So that kinds of stuff really resonated for me, that a lot of people are going to have problems in their life. They're going to struggle. It says even someone as great as Jim Braddock, who's a great boxer, had struggles in his life and had to come up and end up getting help from people. And it says that even great people shouldn't be too proud to accept help or ask for helps if you need it, if you're struggling and you're down on your luck. And just the time period, like you said early on, the set production, the direction, the costumes, so much of the crafts aspects of Cinderella Man were just so spot on. It's shocking that more people don't look at this movie as one of the greatest sports movies of all time. In my opinion, it's right up there in the top 25, 30 of the greatest of all time. Of course, when you think about the great boxing films, you think about Rocky. I think about Ray Bull, but Cinderella Man is right in there with those 2 films. And that's the reason, to me, it stands the test of time, and it will stand up for decades to come. People will have more and more appreciation for this film because they will start to see how, especially like in 2020, we're in 2021 now, but we kind of had a really rough year in 2020. And I'm sure a lot of people could relate to Cinderella Man that were going through a lot of struggles in 2020. And so that's another reason why this film really can resonate with a lot of people throughout history. But I just want to say, Rachel, once again, I really appreciate you coming on Bleacher Features with me. This is your second episode this season, and I couldn't imagine anybody better to talk about this film with. You really have an appreciation and love of Cinderella Man, and it showed by your conversation, your dialogue with me tonight. So I really appreciate that. Where can you be found in the interwebs?
The kids can find me at RM Silvestrini on both Twitter and Instagram. I am a little more active there than anywhere else. You can find me periodically on the Schmodown. Check that out. Follow them at SEN Network on YouTube, and matches are going crazy wild. It's a really intense season. And yeah, just come hang out and support the Den.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to catch back up on my Schmodown watching. I'm a little bit behind. And you can find me you can find me at Dan Skip Allen on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Also, I'm a film critic in the Orlando, Florida area. I write for a website called disappointmentmedia.com. Don't at me. I didn't come up with the name. I just write for them. Also, if you're interested, I also have my own blog, which I write for. So between those two, the site disappointmentmedia.com and my own blog, I basically have written about all the newest movies that have come out in theaters, a little bit of awards coverage, some retrospectives on older movies. If somebody had died, like Christopher Plummer died, I did beginners. So stuff like that. I cover all kinds of different things. So if you're interested in reading anything that I have written, those are the two places to go. Also on the internet, YouTube, I do Bleacher Features, which you're watching right now, which myself and a guest, we talk about a sports movie. It's a summer series. It'll just be this summer, and then this is the third season. So we're right in the middle of recording episodes, so stay tuned for those. And my other show I do is called The Top 5 Weekly, where myself and a guest discuss our top 5 based on a movie that's out in theaters or whatever. Or sometimes I do a special series like I did I'm going to do this year, the Academy Awards series, because of the Academy Awards. So for Rachel and myself, good evening, everybody.